My name is Rob Mitchell, and my paper is entitled The Transcendental, Deleuze, P.B. Shelley, and the Freedom of Immobility. One of the primary goals of this panel is to highlight the utility and importance of Gilles Deleuze's philosophy for scholars of Romanticism. My paper seeks to establish the relevance of Deleuze for Romanticists and Romanticism by linking Deleuze's philosophy both to one of the central Romantic era philosophers, Immanuel Kant, and to one of the more philosophical British Romantic poets, Percy Shelley. What I'm going to argue in short is that part of Deleuze's philosophical method, what I'll call, following James Williams, Deleuze's method of transcendental deduction, both connects Deleuze to the Kantianism with which scholars of Romanticism are so familiar, but at the same time digs deeper into tensions that vex Kant's system, a reading of Kant that then helps us to better understand the role of passivity and temporality in Percy Shelley's writings. I've divided this presentation into three parts. I begin with a quick reminder of the central elements of Kant's method of transcendental deduction. I then consider Deleuze's peculiar version of the transcendental deduction, and I conclude with a brief reflection on Shelley's poem Mont Blanc. Before moving into my first section, though, I wanted to give you a sense of my motivations in writing this paper. The paper has its origins in part in a book project on Romantic-era vitalism, but probably more specifically in a graduate seminar on romantic conceptions of life that I taught this past year. I had students read part of Deleuze's difference repetition for this course, and in one of the sections we considered, Deleuze suggests that our experience of time is the result of three syntheses. There is first what Deleuze calls a sensible synthesis, by which he means the synthesis of past and future into a present that occurs, quote, in the mind which contemplates prior to all memory and reflection, end quote. There is second, the active synthesis of conscious memory. But Deleuze argues that both of these syntheses are dependent upon, quote, organic syntheses, which are like the sensibility of the senses. They refer back to a primary sensibility that we are. We are made of contracted water, earth, light, and air, not merely prior to the recognition or representation of these, but prior to their being sensed. Every organism is a sum of contractions of pretensions and expectations, end quote. Now, a particularly bright undergraduate who's taking the course objected to Deleuze's attempt to ground sensible and perceptible syntheses, that is the first and second synthesis, in an organic synthesis, and the nature of this objection was quite astute. The student argued that whereas Deleuze's claims about the former two syntheses, that is, perceptible and sensible syntheses and the syntheses of memory, seem like philosophical claims, in the sense that philosophy could adjudicate whether or not Deleuze was right or wrong, the question of an organic synthesis seemed to be operating in a completely different level of analysis, biology or physics rather than philosophy. Or as he put it in a more Kantian tone, Deleuze was guilty of making an unwarranted movement from transcendental to ontological claims. I think this is an astute observation, but the purpose of this paper, in part, is to map out the itinerary that would justify Deleuze's movement through Kant to something like ontology. So the first part, the Kantian transcendental deduction. I want to begin with a quick reminder of how Kant understands the term transcendental. Kant introduces the concept of the transcendental in the introduction to the Critique of Pure Reason, noting there that he describes as, quote, transcendental all knowledge which is occupied not so much with objects as with the mode of our knowledge of objects, insofar as this mode of knowledge is to be possible a priori, end of quote. Now, the pronoun our is quite important in the quote that I just read, that is, the transcendental concerns the mode of our knowledge of objects. Kant is interested, as this pronoun suggests, in the a priori modes of knowledge of the particular kinds of beings that we are. And according to Kant, we are a kind of being that is characterized by three active faculties. As Deleuze notes, Kant in fact uses the term faculty in two senses. Sometimes Kant uses the term faculty to refer to relationships between representations and objects, and in these cases he refers to the three faculties of knowing, desiring, and feeling. So, for example, Kant speaks of the faculty of knowing when he refers to our efforts to make our representations conform to external objects. He speaks of the faculty of desire when he refers to our efforts to produce the objects of our representation, as when, for example, we seek to be the cause of a moral action. And he speaks of the faculty of feeling when he refers to the effect of a representation on the vital force of the subject, that is, the capacity of a representation to intensify or diminish the sensed vital force of the subject. According to Kant, our everyday experience involves different and often confused kinds of relationships between the three faculties of knowing, desiring, and feeling. For example, we may claim to have knowledge of an object when in fact we simply desire it. or we may believe we desire an action when in fact the representation of this action simply produces pleasure. Thus, as Deleuze notes, a transcendental analysis of these faculties, that is, the faculties of knowing, desiring, and feeling, means for Kant the task of locating the higher form of each of these faculties. A higher form of a faculty means a form in which the faculty gives itself its own law rather than being directed by other faculties. The higher form of the faculty of knowing, for example, would be that form in which knowing gives itself its own law rather than being directed by the faculties of desiring or feeling. However, Kant also uses the term faculty in a second way, to refer to a source of a representation, rather than the relationship between representations and objects. And in the second instance, he speaks of the three faculties of reason, understanding, and imagination. The faculty of imagination, for example, links intuitions of objects with concepts. The faculty of understanding produces concepts, and the faculty of reason produces ideas, which in Kant's system are concepts that go beyond the possibility of experience. And in fact, he actually speaks of four faculties here, for there's also the faculty of sensibility, by means of which we generate intuitions, what he calls intuitions. However, this faculty is not of special interest to Kant because it is not for him active. That is, it does not synthesize, it is simply a faculty of reception. As Deleuze notes for Kant, quote, "Our constitution is such that we have one receptive faculty and three active faculties." End of quote. It's Kant's method of transcendental deduction that allows us to link these two senses of the term faculty. We locate the higher form of the faculties of knowing, desiring, and feeling when we employ a transcendental deduction to determine what Kant calls the relationships of legislation between the faculties understood in the second sense, that is, as sources of representation, in which case we have the three faculties of reason, understanding, and imagination. For Kant, the faculties of reason, understanding, and imagination are all always involved in each of our pursuits and activities, but the question is which of these faculties directs, that is, which legislates for the others. In the Critique of Pure Reason, transcendental deduction reveals that a higher form of knowledge is possible when the faculty of understanding legislates over, that is, directs the activities of the faculties of reason and imagination. While in the Critique of Practical Reason, transcendental deduction reveals that a higher form of desire is possible when reason legislates over the faculties of the understanding and imagination. So part 2, Deleuzian transcendental deduction. Now all of what I have said will strike you, I assume, as uncontentious, that is simply an explication of Kant's claims as Kant presented them. What interests Deleuze about the Kantian system, though, are Kant's brief allusions to what Deleuze calls the genetic aspects of Kant's system. That is, those moments in which Kant realizes that he can't simply assume valorized particular legislative relationships between faculties, but instead has to show the conditions of possibility that would allow such relationships to be produced in the first place. And with respect to these genetic moments in Kant, the moments of genesis, Deleuze argues in short 2 points. First, he argues that the condition of possibility for any determinate legislative relationships between faculties is that these faculties are capable of a free and indeterminate, that is, a non-legislative, mode of accord, or harmony. And second, he argues that such non-legislative modes of accord can only be understood if we understand the terms sensation and ideas, those two terms, sensation and ideas, differently than Kant. Rather than understanding sensation as simple receptivity, as does Kant, we have to understand it as a mode of synthesis. And rather than understanding ideas as non-determinate concepts produced by reason, as does Kant, we have to understand them as tensions, what Deleuze calls problems, that traverse all the faculties and tie these faculties into the world itself. Let me begin with Deleuze's claim about the relationship between legislative and non-legislative modes of relationship between faculties. Deleuze argues that Kant cannot, within the terms of his own system, simply, quote, invoke a harmonious accord of the faculties that characterizes the different legislative relationships of knowledge and morality. Rather, quote, the critique in general demands a principle of this possibility for an accord of the faculties, end of quote. Deleuze argues that Kant himself locates the condition of possibility for these different forms of harmony between faculties in a more fundamental capacity for a, quote, free and indeterminate accord between faculties. That is, Deleuze argues, quote, every determinate accord between the faculties presupposes that the faculties are, at a deeper level, capable of a free and indeterminate accord. It is only at the level of this free and indeterminate accord, sensus communis aestheticus, that we will be able to pose the problem of a ground of the accord. Not surprisingly, Deleuze turns to Kant's critique of judgment into its analysis of the so-called reflective judgment, that is the kind of judgment that Kant